It's quiet now here in the south of Kabul, but the year started very differently. The Taliban were behind those hills over there and had been besieging the city for months. There were almost daily rocket attacks. During the course of 1995, the Taliban had swept through the country, but had got stuck behind those hills, just short of Kabul, the major prize in the fighting. Then, this summer, they changed tactics and caught everybody by surprise. They pushed from the east of the country and managed a series of rapid victories. The Taliban's aim is to bring their brand of Islamic Sharia law to the whole of Afghanistan. Their first successful target this year, in September, was the eastern city of Jalalabad. They swept into the city in large numbers, almost without a shot being fired. A group of factions which was holding Jalalabad had crumbled and fled. The Taliban took control of the city's airport and, more importantly, for the first time, captured part of the main road from Pakistan to Kabul. The people of Jalalabad weren't hostile to the Taliban, partly because most of them come from the same ethnic background. Many said they had bought peace and that the factions they had replaced had been corrupt. The Taliban didn't at first impose any of their strict Islamic measures, but instead made vague statements about possible future changes. Those who captured the city were military men, not policymakers. Unable to seize Jalalabad back, President Rabbani's government reinforced positions further up the road towards Kabul. They fortified two gorges, which stood between the Taliban and the capital. The government was especially confident it could hold one of them, known as Silk Gorge. When the Soviet Red Army was occupying Afghanistan in the 1980s, it had tried for years to clear the gorge, but never really managed. The Rabbani government pushed in heavy armor and waited for the Taliban attack. When it came, their defenses melted away. The reasons are unclear, but it seems some key commanders may have done deals with the Taliban instead of holding their ground. After capturing the two gorges, the way lay open to Kabul along flat ground, and less than an hour's drive away. Kabul had never been captured by force during the past 17 years of conflict in Afghanistan, but the Rabbani government decided not to stand and fight. They said they wanted to spare more bloodshed of civilians. The government forces retreated north, and the Taliban walked in. When the Taliban arrived in the city, one of their first acts was to find and kill, without trial, the former Moscow-backed president, Dr. Najibullah, along with his brother. The two men were seized from a United Nations compound where they'd been living in custody under UN protection. Their mutilated bodies were strung up on a street corner near the presidential palace. The people of Kabul were appalled, and any welcome the Taliban might have had disappeared overnight. The Taliban never publicly acknowledged their action, but the commander responsible for the killings was removed from Kabul.
On the first day they took over, everyone was happy. They thought all their problems would be solved, peace would come and security. But then the Taliban executed the former president, Dr. Najibullah, and his brother, and everyone was upset because it seemed they were trying to kill the mind of the Afghan people. They told women to stay at home. That's not acceptable, especially in a city like Kabul, because most women have to work to feed their children. There are 25 to 35,000 widows doing this. The Taliban are also beating up women on the street if they're not dressed properly.
Unlike in Jalalabad, the Taliban immediately made major changes in Kabul. They regarded themselves as the new government and set about making the capital a model of Taliban administration. Women were told they must cover themselves completely in public at all times. The Taliban regard anything else as un-Islamic.
The Taliban army said on the radio, all the people go to the mosque, and all the time, morning, afternoon, evening, and 5. And all the people, the Afghanistan has Muslim and Islami, and this problem for the people. They are go to the shop, they are go to the office, and they can't all the time go to the mosque, and they can't pray in the shop, in the office, and etc.
The Taliban also banned women from working, stopped them using their own public baths, and forbade all education for them. Girls' schools with decades of proud history were deserted. There was international condemnation, and many aid agencies in Afghanistan had to close down their projects relating to women, many of whom are the most needy victims of the conflict.
I would say the most significant change for the UN and all aid agencies is that we don't have women working for us now. Our programs were designed to reach the majority of the recipients that were women, using women, and they're not available to us now.
As the Taliban consolidated their control on Kabul, they also pushed further north, chasing the retreating government troops led by their main commander, Ahmad Shah Massoud. But the Taliban's advance faltered. Ahmad Shah Massoud joined forces in a military alliance with his former enemy, General Abdul Rashid Dostum, who controls most of North Afghanistan. The Taliban were pushed back to not far north of the capital, but they now control about 3/4 of the country. With their control holding in Kabul, the Taliban promised that everything would be better under their administration. But in a city where there's enough hardship already and little entertainment, they also introduced other measures that were unpopular. They burnt cinema film and conducted house-to-house searches for televisions, which they also banned. Sports were forbidden too, and some of the last remains of alcohol met a symbolic end.
The aim of Islamic movement of Taliban in Afghanistan is to bring or to establish peace and security in our country, to collect arms and ammunition from irresponsible people, hand over all these arms and ammunition to the national army.
In many ways, security in Kabul has improved and crime has been reduced. The Taliban insist they'll impose their interpretation of Islamic Sharia law, and that if the international community understood what this meant, the movement would be recognized as a government. No country has yet done so. But the priority for most people in Afghanistan is simply food. People are selling whatever they can to try to feed themselves, and many have sold almost all their possessions. The irony is that the markets are well stocked now that the Taliban control all the major trade routes to Kabul, except the road to the north. But few ordinary people can afford what's on offer. The conflict in Afghanistan continues and shows no sign of ending. But the fighting isn't happening in a vacuum. Probably the beginning of the end will only come about when neighboring countries, all with their own agendas, stop supporting the different warring factions, support that keeps the fighting going. Sadly, it's the ordinary civilians in the coming year who will suffer increasingly.